I am so honored and excited to introduce to you and welcome today's panel, AMCD and AADA Partnership Centered on Multiculturalism and Social Justice and Lifespan Development. Today's program will be recorded. I'm going to start recording right now. And I'm really pleased and honored to welcome with gratitude AMCD President Dr. Kim Lee Hughes, AADA President Dr. Christian D. Chan, and AMCD AADA Task Force Chair Dr. John S. Harrichand. We also have an incredible panel of amazing folks. I'll introduce them all to you. As you're coming in, we just ask you to mute your microphone and mute your video so the speakers will come to the top. All right, and some of our incredible panelists today include Dr. Tamika Bell, Dr. Tasha Christian, Leah Herbert, Dr. Darlene Chen, Dr. Tamika Hunter, Dr. Marlon Johnson, Janelle Jones, Dr. Helena Stevens.
Hi, Sophie. It's pronounced Tamika, like Tamika,
Thank
like
you.
Dr. Hunter. It's pronounced Tamika the same way. Two Tamikas in the house.
Yeah.
So as you're around in the room, if you can go ahead and mute your speaker and mute your video. So just our panelists will have live video. All right, today's program goes from 1 to 2:30 p.m. We'll have some time for question and answers at the end. And right now I'd like to hand the mic over to Dr. Kim Lee Hughes. Please take it away, Dr. Hughes.
Oh, thank you so much, Sophia. We are really excited to be here with you this afternoon. We, at least for me as a counselor educator, I totally appreciate you tuning in, doing what is a extremely busy time for most of us. Dr. Chan and I have been working together for many years, since we were actually graduate students, me a doctoral candidate and he a doctoral student and an emerging leader, as he always has been. And we just want to welcome you in to talk about a collaboration we thought about when we realized we had both won national presidencies, once again, mirroring one another's path, success, and passion. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chan, because he is the person that tapped me on the shoulder to do this initiative. And so, Christian, would you share your inspirational point with our viewers?
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Kim Lee Hughes. I have just truly cherished our relationship over so many years. I know that we are both extremely relational people, and that is what has fed into the life and the creativity and the zest around these task forces and this partnership. So first, where the inspiration started for this was, I think, with the ways that we've seen so much of our work, particularly our work in multiculturalism, social justice, lifespan human development, and seeing lifespan human development not only through child and adolescence, but entirely across the lifespan when we think about what happens in those stages that move from 55 and older. And so really honing in on the work that we are doing with older adults and seeing how important that is and crucial it is to the work that we are doing, particularly in not just our advocacy and activist spaces, but also as we are trying to transfer that into law and policy. So I will say that that's where the heart of this work certainly came from. It came from our relationship. It came from our vested interest in both of our organizations and certainly being members of both AADA and AMCD. I will also start by saying that that has been an extremely useful segue to where we see our heart really aligning with this work and aligning with our leadership. So I specifically highlight the fact that for me, noticing that multiculturalism and social justice are very much, oh,
Mute.
I think, sorry, we're getting some feedback. It's all good though. So what I was going to say was that we are seeing so much and how critical this work is now in ways that it's not just consistent with our counselor professional identity, but the ways that we are seeing multiculturalism and social justice at the root of our professional identity, our work, and the ways that we can make an impact with our work in our communities. When I think about not just individual development, but community development. So for people who know me, the major factor in my work has always been, yes, intersectionality, and the ways that it's also flowed through some of my other practice areas and areas of interest. For others who also know me, I'm also somebody who is a family, couples, and group practitioner. So I've seen a lot of these different social identities really work into our work and our practices, and the ways that we've had to broach and particularly have explicit discussions on cultural factors across the lifespan, but also how we dismantle these intersecting forms of oppression across the lifespan. We know that this is still at the root of our work, and at the same time, there are so many ways that we know intersectionality has been transformative and turned into a developmental concept in many ways, particularly as we apply it to our profession. So with that being said, I would like to come back to Dr. Lee Hughes and to certainly start sort of a roundtable here with us as we think about how we've seen this partnership not only enrich our work, but also how it's tied to each of our work and our hearts in this work. So especially as we think about lifespan development, multiculturalism, and social justice.
Sure. As you were talking, I was just thinking about my own trajectory, as we often do, right? We kind of, when we're hearing about the experiences of our clients and of our classmates and other faculty members, because we're compassionate, we put ourselves in their shoes. That's literally what we do as counselors. And I started this journey as a undergraduate at Spelman College. So going to a historically Black college and university at the age of 18 really shot the trajectory that I'm on currently. And I am a professor at Clark Atlanta University, tenure track, which is directly across the street from said institution. And so it's a full circle moment for me in many ways. And I was talking with the panel about my clinical work as a master's student at Georgia State. I worked at the Wesley Woods Center in a senior care facility. And luckily, seniors have some equity, right? Medicare kind of snaps in so that my clients were across a range of social economic standings. And that really turned the light on for me. The difference between the women who were there as tennis moms with their husband feeling depressed in one sense, and the other women who were living in a facility that wasn't as luxurious and yet still having the same needs and concerns, and kind of meeting up in those crossroads. And so when we talked about doing this initiative, I immediately thought, I do lifespan work and have been doing it all along. This is a lovely kind of pattern and trajectory for our professional alliances. And then looking at the awesome leaders who joined us, I just have nothing to say, but we're about to do some stuff, y'all. So I'm gonna kind of pass the baton. I'm looking lovingly at Dr. Tamika Bell, I'm curious as to whether or not she would accept this love offering of introduction.
Of course I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Hughes. I'm very humbled and honored to be part of this wonderful collaboration between AMCD and AADA. I'm Dr. Tamika Bell. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an assistant professor at Governor State University in University Park, Illinois, which is in the south suburbs outside of Chicago. I actually live in Chicago. It's so interesting how, as far as my trajectory, as both of you were talking about how I got to this point. I think as far as when I think about AMCD, I think for me, I think about my trajectory of my racial identity development when I was younger, where I didn't really feel really connected with my racial ethnic group. And it was just interesting at that time just to not feel Black, but be Black. And I know that there are people who probably have experienced that. And then I went to predominantly white institutions for my undergrad and graduate studies. And I would say it probably wasn't until I got to Chicago, well, while I was leaving Bakersfield and got to Chicago, that I really started to, I guess, accept my identity. I mean, it just, when I talk about it, it just sounds so weird, but once I started to accept and be proud of my Blackness and my womanness, then I'm like, I have to connect, because I couldn't have been the only person who's had this experience over lifespan. So, and I realized I wasn't. And then I felt validated. So then I'm like, okay, what can I do to, ensure as far as this transition or things like that? So I would say that's kind of how I got with AMCD, because I wasn't. I'll be honest, I wasn't before. And as far as AADA, interesting enough, one of my research interests, like a lot of people here, one of them is ability. And you think about that can happen across the lifespan. It can happen at birth. It can happen at any point in time across the lifespan. So it's like crucial that we understand, because especially if someone acquires it over the lifespan, that means that they didn't always have it. Now they have to transition and adapt to their life with a change in their ability. And that can be very challenging for individuals to used to be able to do something, to think clearly, to walk, to whatever it is, to no longer being able to do that. And unfortunately, we don't talk a lot about ability a lot. So I feel like that is something that I want to bring and continue to bring with this collaboration, is not only like the intersection of ability, race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, gender expression, all those various intersections, which Dr. Chan spoke about as well. But we need to talk more about ability. We have to talk more about it, because people with different ability statuses are in our classrooms. They're coming to our sessions, and sometimes we may not even know. They may not be even aware or uncomfortable talking about it. It's all these things. So I will stop right there, because I can go on and on about it. I just want to say I'm just very humbled and honored to be among people I really, really admire. Like, I admire you all so much, and to have include me a part of this task force. I'm very honored and I'm humbled. So thank you.
Dr. Bell, I think this is a perfect segue for me to pick this up, because we have a lot of shared interest in addition to the shared name. Talking about identity. Well, first of all, I'm Dr. Tamika Hunter, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas. But thanks to COVID, I am in Atlanta, Georgia still, and will be for this semester. I've heard people talk about identity, and my pronouns are she, her. I was born with a disability, a physical disability is very obvious. I use a mobility device. I'm also an African-American woman, queer identified. I just, you know, God got really happy in this identity pool when it comes to me. But I think the focus of my work, just about what, as Tamika was saying, is that I spent, before getting my doctorate, I spent 17 years with it culminating as my being the director for several years of a disability research center. And disability can impact your life at any point across the lifespan. So my work started out focused on ability status, disability status, and has morphed because I recognize that there are, at the so my work is focused on strength-based approaches, resiliency. Despite the criticisms, there are some good things that can come out of fostering resiliency and grit and those types of things in marginalized and multiple marginalized communities, because I do think that there is tends to be a deficiency focus, or that's how things are framed. If you think about the fact that we, with all of these historically marginalized identities, we are still successful, we're still doing things, we're creating change, we are the change makers, we are the innovators. And so how can we harness that when we work with clients? What are those resiliencies that they already possess that people don't often talk about? It's great to talk about disparity, we understand, but there's also more there. There's that strength-based focus. So that's the focus of my research, working with marginalized, multiple marginalized, intersectional populations. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I love that. And I love that we were going popcorn style, but I want to just kind of lean into what Dr. Hunter has said, this idea of focusing on marginalization, defining ourselves as minorities. Those words have a lot of power. And, you know, I was an English major at Spelman and, you know, do research in the field. And it's an important voice for me as a nearing 53 queer woman who's been married to a man for 20 years with grandchildren and a mother who's showing signs of dementia, but also running for student council, for school board in DC, right? So we came together because life is happening to us too. And we're speaking to you from a place of our own essence. And we appreciate you using positive language and not language that lessens our identity or our mission. So I'm done. Thanks. Marlon Johnson, you are just smiling at me so much, and I know you have to leave a little early. Did you want to introduce yourself?
So it's interesting, Dr. Hughes. I was just thinking in my brain, I would love to go after these two speakers and to tie in. So you must have read both my face and my brain at the same time.
My clinical acumen. That's...
You know, I love it. Well, afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Marlon Johnson. I'm an assistant professor at Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. And I'm honored. I'm excited. I can't but smile when I think about being here because of the people that have been called to do this incredible work. I am, I guess we haven't said this yet, on where we're serving on this task force. And so I'll be working on the position statement with several other of my colleagues here. And gosh, everyone's been talking a little bit about history and past and intersections and ways in which they've gotten here. And it's funny because as I'm hearing Dr. Bell, as well as Dr. Hunter, talk about intersections in different spaces. Dr. Bell, you were talking a little bit about your experience of coming into a realization of what your race means to you as it intersects with your womanness, as it intersects with all these other identities with ability and things like that. And I immediately start thinking of my dissertation work where, you know, I'm looking at myself and looking at the identity of being a queer Black male inside of counseling and counselor education, and recognizing that there's not really a lot of people that share at least my Black and my male identity inside of this space. And why is that? And where does recruitment come from? And one of the things that I stumbled upon is this experience of racial identity not being this linear experience, but that it, in the same way that there are some critical incidences that may provide some movement and your recognition, your understanding, your experiencing of your experience as a racialized being, that happens not in a linear fashion, it happens at different spaces in your life. And so it makes perfect sense to me that maybe race wasn't as salient of an identity because maybe there were other identities that were taking more precedence inside of your life based on the environment, the context that you were in. And I think I share a lot of that experience myself, and not only thinking about it as a researcher, but also thinking of, you know, the individuals that I've encountered over life, the context that I've been a part of over life. And so I'm excited to work on this task force because as y'all are talking about different things, I'm thinking of my experiences of my history of working with sexuality, with spirituality, those intersections. And I'm thinking of even my own parents. So I'm the child of much older parents. My father is in his 70s, my mother is in her mid 60s, and I am just now hitting 30. And so I'm thinking about the experiences of even being a young Black child and being picked up from elementary school and people assuming that my father is my grandfather, and what that does to my own understanding of what does it mean to be a racialized being with a parent who was a part of the pre-integrated South, and the stories and narratives that I encountered in my own process. How did that impact my understanding of justice and advocacy, right? And so as we're going through this process of developing a position statement and talking about multiculturalism and social justice and advocacy and leadership, all of those conversations swirl around and what it means to do justice work, and to understand that it is a lifelong process, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear process as well. And that our contexts change based on both the bodies that we inhabit, but the people in which we encounter over the lifespan. So yeah, I'm just excited, y'all. We're gonna do some real fun stuff.
Well, it's quiet, so I'll speak.
Nice, love it.
I do that. My name is Dr. Tasha Christian. I am here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I always emphasize Commonwealth because we're different. I don't know what we're doing some days. And so, and I'm gonna share a little bit of my journey and then kind of tell you what I do for a living now, because I think it flows and makes sense. So, but to highlight, thank you, Dr. Johnson, for kind of sharing that we do need to give that distinction. I am working on the AADA side with the video practice briefs. And so I'm a member of both divisions and have served in both and believe in both. And I must say, I believe in the leadership on both in our divisions. So, you know, to you, Dr. Lee Hughes, to you, Dr. Chan. You know, when you have those days and those moments where you're like, why do I do this? Just know as your colleagues, we believe in you. So I do find it important to reaffirm, and I guess that really speaks to my cultural belief system and racial belief system, and then professional one as well, and the importance of community and who we are. I really echo Dr. Bell when she talked about growing up in a predominantly white area. I grew up in a rural area in Virginia, and then decided I wanted to go to an HBCU because I knew I wanted to leave the state of Virginia for a while, and I felt like I was suffocating. And quite frankly, I hadn't been around that many people who looked like me. And then I got to Morgan State University in Baltimore, and I was like, wait, everybody looks like me. I don't know what to do because they're different. You know, they weren't. I was like, wait, this is not how my cookouts are at home. So, you know, it was different, but it was beautiful because it was an oasis for a short time, but an oasis nonetheless. And, you know, people sometimes will talk now about the ability to present well or speak well and all that good stuff. And I always talk about, I learned that at my HBCU because you could not leave Morgan State University without presenting yourself in the best way possible because so much was at stake.
Right.
And I hold that true and near to my heart now. And so I came back to Virginia and just did not like the way it looked anymore and have just kind of stayed ever since. And made a decision probably about 2 years ago that I was going to work to continue educating our Commonwealth. In Virginia, we provide a lot of community mental health services that, quite frankly, don't look the same based upon socioeconomic status, which is often linked to racial identity. And I knew the quality. I interned and worked at, you know, facilities where you pay $30,000 out of pocket, and then facilities where it's fully Medicaid funded, and the inequities were glaring. And so I made a decision that, you know, a little while ago, on the top level of our government, we had some cultural issues that came up, and they issued a call and said, we need some people to teach us. And so I was honored to become one of those people, and so have just taken time now on a kind of a state level to teach on that level. Because what I have found is that most of the people who are making the decisions for people that look like me don't look like me, and have not understood that our development, whether racially or developmentally, chronologically, ebbs and flows. And so while I had some cultural capital growing up in a predominantly white area, I didn't have as much necessarily when I got to the doctorate level. And so those were areas where I had to learn how to navigate. And so my area of research is generational trauma, especially in Black communities. And so I am finding myself having to teach agencies and professionals how to account for a lack of development at times, or a regression in development solely based on cultural traumas. I'll share this very quickly. I'm working on a group, and we're issuing an anti-racist statement. And we've met for 3 weeks now on using the word Black. And I'm saying, so before we have a conversation on an anti-racist statement, you got to be comfortable with using the word Black. We've used every word but Black. We've used marginalized, historically disenfranchised, unheard, unseen. Black, you can say Black, right?
Yeah.
And so that is where we are. And I find this task force so important for this time, because what I think it will do is answer some questions and answer some assumptions that we have, and teach our colleagues and those who are entering the profession those considerations. I really echo what everyone else has shared. I always knew I was Black, but then sometimes things happen to remind you that you're Black. whether hurtful or not, but they remind you for a second, and then you become very unapologetically Black, and you enter that space, and you recognize the importance of lending a voice. And so I think that's what our task force is going to do. Two major divisions in the association, and it's a great time to be a part of ACN. I'm excited. I'm like, okay, come on, we got these statements, let's go. And so I am excited about that, and where we're going to go. And I, because I say this all the time on our level, and I will say it in a frustrated manner and don't care. And I keep saying the reason why your programs keep failing is because you don't bring counselors and counselor educators to the table. This is why it continues to fail. And so how many times are you going to put all this money out and keep messing up? So I think that these type of task forces will catapult us into the areas where change agents and decision makers are. And so we'll be at the table more. I think things work better when we're at the table. So I'm excited to sit at this table with so many wonderful people.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. And I am Dr. Darlene Chen. I am assistant professor at Palo Alto University. So I'm in California right now. And I have to say, super excited when I got the invitation from both leaders. And I was definitely super surprised. And just be honest with everyone here. And I think mainly because of my interesting background is being an immigrant in this country. So I was international student, and I thought I know who I was until when I was 20 years old. And I feel like everything need to go back to square one. I think a lot of you commented that the lifespan, this life development is not linearly. I totally agree with that, because that's what I've been struggling, I've been experiencing. And that's why when I got invited to working with you all, I hope that this is definitely my passion, working with immigrants in these countries. And also I currently training a lot of international students, not only receiving higher education counseling training in the States, but also reside globally. So I really hope that with my specialty and my passion, I would love to see our statement can be more inclusive, not only can apply to the residents in the US, but globally, how we can promote and advocate for our statement globally. And so I have clinically working with a lot of immigrants, and not only a lot of like second generation or first generation still see a lot of struggles with who I am and in terms of that cultural identity. In California, a lot of immigrants, specifically Asian and Latinx, and they are really family oriented. So how we can train students and counselors to work with that dynamic. And that I hope is speaking from my heart. And again, super excited to join you all, and looking forward our audience today and to see any feedback that would like us to assimilate our statement and make it stronger and more inclusive, diversified our statement. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I will jump in and share next. Hello, everyone. I am Janelle Jones. I am a third-year doctoral student at the University of Alabama. And so when I was invited to be on this task force and work on the position statement, I felt like I had gotten an invitation to a wedding where you know both the bride and the groom, or the bride and the bride, or the groom and the groom. Because I'm a part of both AADA and AMCD. I'm a 2019-2020 AMCD mentee. And I am the Professional Development Chair for the Association for Adult Development and Aging. So both of these organizations feel like home to me and have truly helped me along my student and professional growth trajectory. And so In terms of situating myself, right, and thinking we've been touching upon our history, and much like Dr. Johnson here, my parents are older as well. And so my mom literally just turned 65 this year, became an older adult, and I'm still in my 20s. So I grew up with older parents, and I lived in a intergenerational household. My grandmother lived with us. And so what brought me to being interested in the intersections of both race and aging identities, I remember sitting with my grandma watching CNN live coverage of Ferguson. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, she's seen this before, time and time again, decades and decades, movements throughout her lifespan. And I wonder how she feels in this moment. Is she triggered? Is this bringing up old trauma for her? What's going on? And so now here I am, about to embark upon a dissertation process. So good energy, y'all. Send me good. Yeah. I'm embarking on this process, and I'm really interested in looking at Black older adults' experiences with racial trauma. And so, of course, again, we find ourselves at the intersection of identity and aging and across the lifespan. And so this invitation was like a wedding. I was like, okay, I'm excited. I'm going to show up. It's going to be great. And it's going well. And I'm very excited to continue to develop the position statement. And of course, being informed by participants, again, as Dr. Chen mentioned today, what you guys would like to see, but also knowing that the strength and the overall commitment both of these organizations have had to bettering our profession, our colleagues, our students, our supervisees over the years is really going to inform this strong position statement. So thank you for allowing me to be on the task force and be here today.
Yeah, I think I'll go next. So my name is Leia Herbert, and also good afternoon, everyone. I am a second year at the University of Central Florida. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and currently my research topic is teacher mental health promotion, as well as post-traumatic growth and looking at ways that we can reduce trauma, particularly in the relational context of our family and our social support systems. Embarking and getting the invitation to come on the task force was something of such an honor. I still in my mindset have this mentality that I'm the new kid on the block. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm taking it one day at a time. And it's just such an honor, honestly. When I saw everyone else that's kind of on this task force, I was like, really, me? Okay. But it's just been an exciting journey from kind of developing the statement to working towards our video briefs. And the video briefs in itself was something I was extremely excited to be a part of, because advocacy for me is very closely tied to accessibility. It's tied to not only climbing up the ladder to get up the mountain, but bringing other people up with you. And I'm a big believer in servant leadership. You know, I aspire to be like this really phenomenal counselor and this phenomenal future faculty and policymaker and changer, but I don't ascribe to do it alone, and I don't ascribe to know all the answers. So I love collaboration. I love working with and for other people. And I just think that video briefs is a really great start to do that. I'm a big fan of the socio-cultural context. That's definitely flavors my counseling style, my relationship style as a daughter, a friend, all the different roles that I hold in my personal and professional life. And ultimately, just being on this task force, I feel like the community has been absolutely awesome. And I think we are all living testaments of the ability to move from the label of multiculturalism to living multiculturalism. And it's just been such an honor. And, you know, just given my personal background as like a first generation American and growing up in a military family and moving for most of my lifestyle, also similar to a few other people mentioned, growing up in a multi-generational household. So I'm both blessed and lucky to have both of my great-grandparents on my mother and my father's side, and being super close with them, calling them almost every week and different things of the sort. But I think, to steal from Dr. Chan, so much of our work in the research realm and the teaching realm and the counseling realm, it's me search. And, you know, we think we're reading, we think it's so outside of us, but it's so internal as well. So I'm just grateful to, you know, be a contributor in any way possible, and to really add in any aspect that I can to the phenomenal work that is being done. And just the excitement of working on the national level is super exciting. So that's it.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. John Harrichand. I am out here in Rochester, New York, where we have been making headlines as of late with the wrongful killing of the man named Daniel Prude. And there's a lot taking place in Rochester, so please keep us in your prayers, but also continue to hold us accountable as an institution, as a state, as leaders in the state of New York, that we are hopefully going to have justice for this man and his family, but also to have hold our administrators accountable and hopefully create the change that we need within our society. So that's something that's been weighing on my heart today. But apart from that, I welcome all of you. It is an honor to serve with so many phenomenal people. We often say that we walk on the shoulders of giants, but here within our midst, we have living giants who are doing amazing work in supporting various communities across the United States and frankly, internationally, you know, so, and for that, we, as a profession, I am very much thankful for that. I'm thankful for the leadership of both Dr. Hughes and Dr. Chan, and just for the ability to collaborate as national divisions within our counseling community, which is something that I have not experienced personally. So having that come up as an option to get involved was where do I sign up? was more of my response to that space. So even as we continue to grapple with so much within our society, I think that it is, in a sense, for me, therapeutic to be in space and hold space for us as fellow counselors, so that we then too could be able to give voice to our experience, to give voice to hopefully your experience, and in that space, find ways that we too can experience whether that be the healing that we need, so that we too can continue to engage in the healing work that we do day in and day out. So from that space, I don't know if Dr. Chan or Dr. Hughes was going to comment on the specific distinctions of these two task forces that we have, but I'll just kind of share a little bit, and maybe both of you can add to that after. But we were, well, both Dr. Hughes and Dr. Chan came together. They created this collaboration, and they chose, I really do think this is very intentional, and I appreciate this, as to the approach of how they saw this collaboration taking shape. And it's taking the form of two separate task forces. One that's looking at a position statement that really captures multiculturalism, social justice across lifespan development, and hopefully it will capture all these different intersecting identities, constructs that are taking place within our world today. And the other piece is creating practice briefs, video practice briefs, which are short videos that will cover, I believe, there are 4 questions that the task force has created. And hopefully Leah had shared that she thinks that it's so kind of neat as to me questioning, should I be in this space? But knowing that her voice really does add to this space, add value, and her being adds value to this space. So just knowing that too, of saying, how then do we not just appreciate what those who have gone before us specifically in doing this work of multiculturalism, lifespan development, and helping us really support our communities, but also looking at it from the position of who are the people that are coming up into that space and giving them a platform and honoring the work that they're doing, and really hopefully in a way positioning them to be voices of reason, voices that come from a place of science, voices that come from a place of experience as well, in terms of hopefully educating the future of our profession, our communities just broadly. So really, I am super excited. We, as a task force for the video practice briefs, we have selected a group of 13 individuals who are practitioners, who are researchers, and we're super excited to kind of like share that news with them and hopefully have them accept this mantle, this huge responsibility, yet needed opportunity to kind of work with both divisions and producing these practice briefs. And then the second part of creating the position statement is that we're working together in terms of figuring out how do we capture the essence of what's taking place within our world right now, then moving from that space. Also, first of all, coming from a perspective of what has been happening generationally, right? And then moving from that place of what's been taking place generationally and what do we see repeating itself today. And then from that place is to saying, what then do we as counselors need to do, our call to action, our response in that space, and then figuring out how then in that call to action to incorporate whatever your voices have to say in that space as well. So with that, I am going to probably throw it back to both of our division presidents and we can continue on with our webinar. But thank you.
So Christian, I kind of saw you were moving, but I will jump in and just say that I am listening to all of the members of our task forces and thinking very clearly about Crumbosa's theory of planned happenstance. Like none of this is coincidental, right? We've all been working our way to this exact moment in space. And much like many of us have said, all of our particular intersections are coming together in this moment to shine. My dissertation work, which is, 5 years ago now, right? I'm big time, right? But when I did my dissertation under the leadership of, and I have to speak her name, Dr. Annalise Singh, because she does such phenomenal work in the field, right? And so under her direction, I did a manuscript style dissertation, which meant I graduated with 3 fully formed manuscripts, right? And here we are 5 years later. I won an award for one of those from Algebra Tech last year, still publishing some of those other pieces. And I only say that and thank you, of course, I love the applause, right? But I'm saying that because I planted that seed over 5 years ago. It took me 3 years almost to get out of UGA collectively. Like I thought I was graduating and I wasn't quite right. That kind of, that dance, that back and forth, push and pull. I did not go back to even start a master's until I was 40 years old. So I think we often think about life like if we haven't done it by 30, it's not going to get done. And that is a sickness, I think, in this country of youth culture. Like we just do not value the wisdom in our elders, and we see it reflected. We heard it in the voices of our multiple panelists, right? And I've, you know, at 53, my knees are shaky now, and they were not at 33, right? And so aging sneaks up in really some beautiful but yet insidious ways. And this task force has already started to do the work that addresses those issues in multiple ways. And yeah, it's an awesome feeling to be a part and to be seen as a leader amongst leaders. It's phenomenal.
So I have such immense gratitude for each of you. And I think in this same vein, we laid the groundwork, right? But then you took off with it and you launched it. That is what's happening. And what I will say is I wanted to pose a question, a discussion question to our panelists, because I also want, I want some of this to be food for thought, for critical thinking for our audience members today. So when you see where we're at right now in the profession, how might perhaps the two task forces address some of the issues in the profession and grow some new innovative practices that meet where we need to be in the profession?
So I think I will chime in and say that historically, older adults were a hugely underserved population, the most underserved population within our counseling profession. And we can say the same about various minority groups, right? Individuals that have minority identities, intersecting identities. And so what we're actually seeing now is that some of the stigma, while it hasn't been fully erased within older populations, we're seeing older adults access counseling at higher rates than ever before. We're seeing individuals with multi-minority identities accessing counseling more than ever before, which is wonderful. And at the same time, with that being said, we as a profession need to continue to develop and grow our cultural humility and cultural competence to work with these populations that are now accessing counseling, because of course we don't want their first experiences with counseling to be with counselors that don't know how to work with this population, aren't aware of various issues that affect these populations. And so to answer your question, I think these task forces coming together, these organizations coming together to form a task force is going to help our profession overall in helping our clients who are now, unfortunately, being able to access counseling.
I agree. To bounce off that point as well, I think we have a dual issue. We have on the demand side, increasing amount of older populations accessing counseling, utilizing services. So that's not really a concern, but that's a more so of a need. But I think what we're also having on the other end is kind of a supply chain issue with, as you guys know, with licensure and coverage, right? So there is a hierarchy in mental health, right? It is kind of the doctor, the psychiatrist, the social worker, then the counselor. Then depending on what state, it's like MFT or LMHC or all those different things.
Yes.
Having my background going to school in Jacksonville University, and working a lot with the elderly population. And one of my professors, Dr. Whitney George, her specialty was geriatric psychology. So I was really lucky to have that training. There was a lot of issues with LMHCs being able to work in full capacity with that population due to licensure issues, and they would end up being blocked out by more so social workers or other professions that had that coverage to write it off. So I do think, like, from a policy standpoint, where my head immediately goes to, that's another concern, you know, that definitely comes up when I'm thinking about our conversation right now.
I think one area, and we look at, you know, our older adult population too, and anyone who's been a practitioner, you know, when you're asking that older adult, well, what medications do you take? And they're taking an antidepressant or an anxiolytic, and you're like, do you know why you're taking that? Because there's been such a high prevalence to medicate, right? And I think what makes us unique as counselors is we operate from a wellness perspective. That is who we are. That is our professional identity. And I think that that's one of the reasons why that hierarchy exists. Is some of our other, you know, colleagues in service operate from a medical model. And so that is often the one that's most reimbursed. And so I think that for us, you know, in that space, and I think that for us, what is unique about this task force is I think we'll be able to provide that education to really show our counselors, our practitioners, you are going to have to take a more unique approach with an individual, you know, a client who is 70, who's culturally, or, you know, whether that's age or racial identity, has not really gotten this whole counseling thing and why I need to go. And you know, years ago, you would see an aunt say, well, let me go take a nerve pill. And she would take a nerve pill and go lay down, right? But we never told our aunt, but you also need to talk to somebody, right? And so because of that, we created these generations of stigmas that have just stuck. And so I think that what will be unique for our profession is to increase that visibility in communities to really stress the importance of wellness. And really the importance of comprehensive work. We always talk about it, right? We always say from a best practices model, services should be as comprehensive as possible, yet we don't acknowledge the competition amongst, you know, the professions and the identities. And so, you know, what you'll have a client who will say, I go to Dr. So-and-so, and you're thinking to yourself, well, you need to see somebody too. And I think that is what will make us unique. And I say that because, you know, counselors, we learn helping skills. We're very intentional with our interventions. There's an art and a science to that that I think will be important for us to use. I love the fact that our populations are accessing counseling far more. I think where we will shine is being able to educate our counselors on, you know, being present in our communities and understanding that the medical model has often reigned supreme, but we're going to have to remain true to our counseling identity and really focus on wellness as well.
I'm just doing a little bit of a bump in because Natasha just really had my wheels turning about what are those steps that get us here. And I thought about the work we did in Montreal in the 2016 ACA conference. And so it also harkens back to my history with AMCD because I started as a committee chair for the day of service. And that year when we were in Montreal, we were a little bit afraid. We had that old model where we would rent a van and everybody would go out for the day in the van, you know. That's back when vans were still being rented and before Uber and Lyft, right? And so I'm saying that because it was in a different country. I was a little bit reluctant to be the driver of a van. So we shifted the focus and made it a know thyself. And we bought individuals from Canada to talk with us. And in one case, we were talking about reparative therapy. We were talking about transgenderism and just the whole phenomenon around what that looks like for parents in Canada in this case. And that ended up becoming a part of the webinar series and video briefs that ACA also, because when they got wind of what we were doing, they were like, they're doing a good thing. We need to bring that in. And so we have been pushing this envelope for quite a few years before we were ever elected. And because my initiative is about leadership, specifically, my theme is where I enter intersectional leadership across regions, class, and classification. And that is very, very much a womanist lens. And it is meant for all the work we are doing here. And so I kind of wanted to jump in there to say, that we're looking at this from multiple levels and multiple perspectives, and there's room for everyone on the webinar to become a part of this lovely quilt that we're putting together.
Yes, also Dr. Hughes, I really appreciated your discussion about the cross-cultural component as well. Sometimes even myself, you know, first generation, I always have to remind myself, like, counseling is not America. Counseling is not Florida, where I'm in, you know, like, it's a part of a broader, ever expansive scope. And my background is more so the sciences. I was in med school before I went to counseling, and I did a study abroad in Costa Rica, and they have universal healthcare, very great community healthcare system, and counselors and the doctors go to the elderly's house. Like, that is like an elderly person driving to a counselor's office or going to a nursing home is like unheard of. And they really have a family knitted culture. And you see aspects of that in the US, where we have the sandwiching generation, what they call it now, where our older adults are living with, you know, adult age populations. And now what does it mean when I'm coordinating remote learning for my children, and I'm also coordinating Medicare and elderly care for my mother, you know, or my parents? So I think that's another area that I feel like counselors can definitely do more work and advocacy in. And then, like you said, the cross-cultural component of seeing what is Canada doing, what is Costa Rica, what are some of these really strong blue zones, right? Because we don't want to just make people live longer. We want to improve the overarching quality of life. And I think that's the wellness component that we have. So I just really want to echo home that, because I really love that piece. And I try to think globally when we think about counseling, wellness, and ways that we can best put forward certain ideals.
And Leah, thank you for bringing this up about the global counseling. And again, I want to go back to the immigrants community. I think one thing is missing is, again, not only about the stigma. I think the other challenge they're incurring is the language. So I think we all being trained to counsel clients using English, and however, a lot of clients out there, that's not their preferred language. And that create their, I guess, fear and anxiety just going to literally making a phone call to make an appointment or having a consultation or intake session. So I think one thing I know, a lot of universities right now increasing their training in different, for example, Spanish counselors, and I'm hoping we can see more language, for example, Mandarin, because it's really different to counsel clients with different language. Reflecting my own training, I had a hard time translate that back to Mandarin. So that's something that I hope we can continue to pay more attention to and make the counseling service more accessible.
I'll chime in here really quickly. I know I have to leave soon, but Dr. Chen and Darlene, what you just spoke of, what all of y'all have really been speaking of, my heart is so full, because I'm thinking about at our seminary, at our school, we have a Latinx counseling concentration. And exactly what you just spoke to, Darlene, that having to translate back and forth between, you're teaching me this concept, but there's not really language to say that to the community that I'm being asked to counsel. Just because I might hold a particular identity doesn't necessarily mean that what you're teaching me is relevant or competent, or that it clearly moves back and forth between these cultures and these communities. And so my hope is that when we're doing this particular work together, that we do continue to engage in conversations like that. Like if I say a particular thing about like what wellness means, I think Dr. Wallace said something in our chat about how different cultures engage in this identity of wellness and self-care, and what that actually looks like and means might be very different linguistically and experientially, and how the opportunity and the access to those things. The ways in which we're talking about this work and trying to create statements about it, especially when we're writing this position statement, starts with asking those questions, like you just said, like, Okay, so we're talking about counseling, right? We're talking about cultural inclusion. We're talking about equity. But do we even recognize how our particular communities, a particular community, does counseling, does healing of a psychological space and psychological state? Because small town South Carolina boy right here, the way that we talked about wellness looks very different than I imagine someone coming from the greater Chicago area or someone who grew up in Southwestern California, right? Like all of that, even though we might have the same on paper Black male identity, right? That's gonna look different. Then we add age. And then we add generational status to whether you're an immigrant coming to this country and you might still identify by the census as Black American, right? Like all of these things, we're gonna have to wrestle with that in hopes that for all of you who are participants, are able to maybe not have a complete answer, but now you know how to wrestle with it. Like our goal isn't to give you the end all be all answer, but we're gonna, my hope, I won't speak for the whole board, but my hope is that I'm generating thought for you as a clinician, as an educator, as a supervisor on like, oh, okay, what are some questions I might need to ask my supervisee? What are some questions I might need to ask my client when it comes to the intersection of age and culture? So, yeah, and I'll pause there and say farewell to everyone so I can go support some students. So.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank y'all.
So I had one point, and I think Sophia needs to jump in just to share a little bit about just as we start moving towards closing. But one piece is also certainly thinking about how we generate even wellness, lifespan development, resilience, grit, not just as individualized phenomena, right? But they are drawing to community phenomena. And I say that in a way that it's also, I recognize through my own lens. And I think about, you know, a lot of my work has been transforming into equity, advocacy, and activism across the lifespan, but also instituting what we know, particularly around health equity, right? So really understanding how health equity plays a part in the services that we provide. And one piece of that is that there's research that supports like, the more likely that you're seeing a provider that looks like you, that represents who you are, that has a linguistic, that there aren't linguistic barriers, that they're more likely, our communities are more likely to access their healthcare. They're more likely to access their counseling services. This, the second piece is, this is why it is so vital for this partnership to happen and why it's so urgent. This piece of health equity also talks about the fact that more communities of color are likely to access healthcare if they have culturally responsive providers. If they don't, they may never come back. They're less likely to get screenings. And like when you think about what we do for school counseling and clinical mental health, couple and family counseling, we have a lot of different services where they won't even go to mental health screenings, right? So because of culturally insensitive care. And so that's that second piece. And I also know from my own lens too, really thinking of who I am as a couple and family practitioner and a group practitioner. And so much of where I see us driving towards as we are thinking about older adults, we are also thinking about caregivers, right? And caregiver stress and burnout. And because so much of these individualized phenomena don't quite only exist as individualized phenomena, I often think in family systems and how we drive our family and couple interventions really into our work and how we start conceptualizing in that way. Because when we think about wellness, right? Wellness for communities of color, like we're thinking it's not just about individual wellness, it's about collective and community and family wellness.
Very much so.
I agree. And, you know, in a lot of our communities of color, we have taken the word resilience and taken that to just mean that we just take whatever comes our way, right? And it's diminished the quality of what we receive. You know, we always say, oh, we can just push through it. We're resilient, but that doesn't mean that we don't deserve to receive the care that we should have. We've taught our communities of color that, and it's been passed down, and there's so much strain that comes with that. Leah, I think when you mentioned, you know, the adult who's dealing with virtual learning for a child and navigating Medicare or dementia for a parent, it's very difficult at times to pay attention to that caregiver strain, right? That we have to look at, because that parent may say to you, who's your client, you know, this is what you got to do, is what you're supposed to do for family. Which may be true, but it doesn't mean that you don't deserve to receive that care as an individual, so that we can then talk about the culture, right? Our cultures have done so well in confusing resilience and accessing care. That we've confused the two, that we believe we're accessing care and treatment because we're resilient. It doesn't mean we're operating from that wellness standpoint. You know, and I think that's just where our cultures have struggled. And so now you have, you know, these older generations who have passed down to other ones. Your lot in life is that you're supposed to struggle.
Yep.
And that's just not accurate. And I think that's for communities of color in general at times. You know, and so I think that it's vital that we keep that consideration in mind. And so when our counselors are taught, and even for our counselor educators, because those same mindsets enter our classrooms. There are students, you know, where you're saying to a student, perhaps you should take a semester off. And they're saying, no, I got to do this right now because someone is waiting on me to finish, right? That I think we have to talk about in seeing that lens and recognize that our approaches may have to change a bit to see that resistance, because it's going to be resistance initially, but then to really empower those communities. Because like you said, Christian, it's not just an individual phenomenon, that's a cultural experience.
I think Dr. Christian, to that point, in addressing bringing things into the classroom, for the counselor educators, for the supervisors who have supervisees who are in training programs, being intentional, right? And I think the great thing about our task force is in this collaboration is that it speaks to intentionality of making sure that we're acknowledging these various pieces of identity and how they impact our clients, our students across their lifespan, right? And so my work is on older adults, but I'm fully aware that someone's marginalized identity didn't start the day they turned 65, right? It has followed them through their lifespan and can influence the way they are going to live out the rest of their lives. It might even shorten their lifespan potentially, right? But speaking towards the classroom is that factor of intentionality, infusing things into your syllabus, being intentional with the readings you're assigning your students, making sure that you go above and beyond K-CREP standards if you have a K-CREP program or whatever your program is following, and making sure to infuse multiculturalism and considerations of the lifespan into each and every class, or that's what I'm attempting to do as I coach and teach. To speak towards the intentionality of educators, and then again of supervisors who are sitting with students who might be embarking upon their first clinical experiences, and making sure to be intentional in the questions you're asking and the things that you are giving them to read and examine.
I agree. I think too, something that came up while you were talking was just the idea of really encouraging and developing counselors that have the comfort level of asking deep culturally competent questions, not being afraid of it, and working with counselors that are counselors of color and counselors that are not of color, that are, you know, Caucasian. I think sometimes in this conversation, it's very much like a counselor's kind of a deemed white and the patient's deemed like a person of color. But there's also like the concerns of, you know, me being a Black identified woman working with a Black identified client, and, you know, assuming sameness when we could have so much different intersectionalities of sorts, or being in the LGBTQ community, Q plus IA community, and working with a client of that community, and, you know, projecting sameness. So I think having that ability to both have one foot in the, you know, the empathy and the understanding, and also have the other foot in like the objectivity and the healing standpoint, I think is really, really important. And just really improving just the counseling process as a whole. I think about our clinical intake assessments, and we do a trauma history, we ask about prior mental health use, but we don't really ask about family resources, community resources. We don't ask about themes of resiliency or separation or loss. It's somewhat of a disservice, you know, and we have the few that, you know, have experience. I have my own little intake form, so I use what my standard stuff, and then I use my little special goodies. But I got to this point through kind of experience, and I think you know, the training, it's good, but we still have places to go in terms of just really improving the overall counseling process from beginning, middle to end.
Yes. Ooh, thank you so much to our division leaders and to each one of our panelists for your vision and your commitment to creating this space and centering BIPOC experiences. And just for your, I'm soaking in all of this wisdom and these like tools. Everything that you're saying is so precious. And thank you for your generosity, especially for sharing so powerfully your own personal and professional experiences around race and culture and language and disability and family and all of that. It's so meaningful. And I like the point about how we're coming from, we kind of began by talking about each of your individual pasts and the choices and passions that led us here today, and then creating the space and everything that will come from this. So I know I'm tuning in from Portland, Oregon, and I'm representing the AMCD Communications Committee. But as a human, as an emerging clinician, as an emerging leader and a woman of color and the daughter of Muslim immigrants, this just feels so huge. And so I'd like to open up a few minutes of space and invite our guests today. If you have any questions or comments or feedback that you'd like to help contribute to the task force, please do so now. You can unmute yourselves and ask a question, or if you feel more comfortable, you're welcome to send a chat to everyone or to me, Sophia Jasani, and I'll read it for you. But yeah, the floor is open. We'd love to include our participants a little bit, and then we'll close in just a few minutes after that. Okay, I see a question from Patricia Johnson. Great point. How do we keep up with the ongoing process of this collaboration?
You can go first, Christian, since you're already established.
So I think there will be plenty that comes out of both task forces. I will say there will be updates from both AADA and AMCD. So that will be rooted in our news and the communications that we send out. But also, we know that one of the direct projects is the video practice briefs. And that is going to essentially be a robust and living project. One that videos will likely show up on both AADA and AMCD's YouTube channels over the next fiscal year. So this is all happening between now and June 30th. of 2021. So, yes, Dr. Hughes, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a whirlwind, right? So, I mean, effective immediately, you'll start to see those products. We will definitely be using the ACA Connect services to post. So AMCD Connect, AADA Connect would be natural portals. We have Facebook pages. I just met with my communications team last week, and if you met me, I am not technically savvy. I'm not. However, I am up on what's hip, right? You know, so I know what I should know, and I have a team that actually has the acumen. So we're spreading out to several social media platforms. We are getting our newsletter together for the fall. So you're gonna, you are seeing us maybe for the first time in this particular role together today, but it is far from the last time. We've got, about 10 more months. You will see us quite a bit over that time.
Thank you. And Leah mentioned in the chat that it will be helpful to follow AADA and AMCD on social media, including Twitter. And you can also follow on Instagram at Fresh Progress Wellness. So get to liking everybody. That's a great way to stay connected. There is also a question from Aza Abram, Agilink. It's important to know whether family is stunting development despite someone seeking help. So how would you deal with that issue? Bringing it back to some more specific questions, thoughts on how family impacts development.
I saw that question, and I'm not a practitioner at this particular state. And so I'm just because I saw it, I thought about the idea of the identified patient came to mind first. Like, is this person kind of being scapegoated for the problems in the family? You know, are they really the problem, or is it a convenient pathway for the problem to be identified? But I also thought about the fact that so few of us have the pleasure of working with families in clinical practice. I know when I was doing counseling, I was able to work with families mostly through problems within the school system, right? Because that's the time when the parents have to get involved in the intervention. So I know there are other clinicians on the platform that maybe have some more direct answers, but I'm just thinking globally about this particular task force having some positionalities around the credibility of family therapy in itself and the importance of looking at families as a whole, as opposed to looking at individual members and kind of fixing the individual members and putting them back in that system.
I also think too, when you think about the stunting part in terms of them engaging in health seeking and the family kind of not being supportive and things of sorts, I think it's really helpful to kind of think of kind of like what Dr. Hughes mentioned, the identified patient, what we can control and what we can't control, I think is really, really important, as well as identifying values as well. You know, sometimes people have different values and their opinions and preferences are really grounded and guided by that. And perhaps in considering the values, we can have a nuanced approach where you are kind of seeing the negativity in terms of help seeking could be from a place of survival, protectiveness. If you know about the history of psychology and medicine, you know, bioethics, right? There's been not the best history with help seeking and communities of color. So I think in having that nuance is helpful in terms of if you were to end up in that kind of situation. But still, as Dr. Hughes mentioned, like thinking of ethics and state guidelines and different things of that sort is extremely important. Always receiving consultation and supervision as well.
Great point, Leah. And thank you, Dr. Christian. Yeah, good point that perhaps that there's room within the conversation series this year to discuss more about family in the video practice briefs. That's a great idea. Before I turn it over to Dr. Hughes and Dr. Chan to wrap things up, I just want to again thank everyone for attending today and to let you know that we hope we'll see you at our next AMCD webinar, which will be called Challenging Myths and Supporting Sex Trafficking Survivors, and that'll be hosted by Dr. Stacy Lightham on Tuesday, October 6th from 2 to 3 p.m. time. And after today's session is over, you'll receive an email that'll have the evaluation in it. You must complete that evaluation, please. It's helpful for us, but also it's how you get your CE certificate. So after this session, please look out for an email with the evaluations, and that's how you'll get your CEs. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Dr. Hughes, Dr. Chan, would you like to take us home? We have 5 minutes left.
So yeah, it is. Yeah, I feel a little overwhelmed with joy because it feels like and I went to Catholic school, girls' school, lots of Greek mythology, along with Alice Walker, right? So it feels very, I feel like Sisyphus, like I'm rolling this huge rock up a hill every day, headed towards social justice and equality, rights for women, and like a world where we all have an equal opportunity to sit at a table that, we know really does not have enough chairs for all of us just yet. So I feel like we are placing a foundation for a bigger table in counseling because there are too few leaders who look and think like us, and we need to change that. So I'm happy to be a part of pushing that agenda relentlessly forward.
So I first want to say thank you to Dr. Hughes, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for being here with us today. So much of our work in this profession is contingent on the work that we all are doing together in community. So much of the impact that we want to see in our profession is not just based on a few leaders, right? It's based on every single individual finding themselves accountable to the work that they must be doing. And I say that for myself too, that I am still doing the work and that we are still making an impact, and we have to do that together. And so, and I will say that so much of what we do too is also based on knowing that all of our, regardless of whether we see our actions as small or big, that they are important and they are critical to seeing the profession that we want to see, particularly as we think about this partnership and the vision that we hold moving forward. So thank you so much, everyone.
It's a grow-up model of leadership. We're just putting the seeds to grow a much bigger tree.
Thank you again. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And to everyone, thank you for attending. We really hope to see you next month at our next AMCD event. Take care, everyone. And there's a lot of nice, positive ideas. So please do have a look. There's a lot of love in there.
Receiving it.
All right, everyone. Be well. Keep working.
Bye.